the NATO cage, voted predominantly against the ceasefire. That's, I mean, 14 countries of all the countries in the world. That's a very small number, but they're very influential countries that said no to the generally very reasonable call for a ceasefire, end the killing. Let's force a dialogue to happen, get the belligerents into the same room to have a conversation, release hostages. That was a big part of it. Release the hostages, right? You could get all hostages released if you just have the ceasefire. Now, Israel, the USA, Canada, a variety of Western European nations that are under the umbrella of NATO, and it's a very, very heavy iron umbrella that you're not really allowed to leave. And the Five Eyes voted against. 46 nations abstained. The rest of the world pretty much said, yeah, we should be doing this. But despite that, there's this weird fanatical fervor within the leadership of the United States, which seems to be doubling down on this idea that whatever Israel does has to be supported. And there's this convergence of people on the left, on the right, who are in opposition on every point that comes up, every single issue, the abortion or whatever. They're in total diametric opposition. But on this issue, we see a disturbing convergence. As
like Ukraine, right? The Republicans and the Democrats could only agree on one thing, which is war. This has some parallels also, where Russia was showing a willingness to go to the negotiating table, to do ceasefire, to talk, diplomacy, all those things that supposedly democratic countries believe in so much, and yet there was such a lack of willingness from the NATO group to do that with the Ukraine conflict, even though they're losing. You would think if you're a loser, you'd want to go to the negotiating table, get the best deal you could get. And yet we're in the same boat here with you mentioned before the show that the Prime Minister of Israel is saying that a ceasefire means they're capitulating to a Hamas victory. And you thought that was an insane type of proposition to put out there.
Oh, it's absolutely insane on a number of levels. But the idea of simply saying we're going to stop killing, which is killing, and Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli forces who are carrying out the attacks that have been underway since as a response to the original invasion of Hamas and the kidnapping of many Israeli people on October 7th, which we've discussed in previous shows, was likely an inside job. I mean, the evidence points loudly to the fact that Israel had foreknowledge. They let it happen in many ways. Their response has been aerial bombardments, white phosphorus, which is a war crime that's been proven. They've been using white phosphorus, which never stops burning. It kills mostly innocents. They've killed well over 8,500 people, according to official estimates so far. They know that they're not killing Hamas soldiers. The vast majority of people that they're killing are innocents. The tunnel systems under the Gaza have been built up over decades and decades and decades. That's where the Hamas soldiers are operating, is in the tunnel system, which is not getting affected by the aerial bombardments. What is getting affected are destroying residential buildings, schools, hospitals, something like 35 different medical I forget the word for it. There's been some big hospitals, but a lot of the smaller ones are managed by like UN officials, UN aid workers. Something like 24 UN aid workers have been killed by the Israeli attacks. Something like 3,000 children have been killed. They know that they're creating only a destructive hate against them through the entire Arab world and beyond. They know that that's the effect, and yet they're doing it anyway. And yet, when the opportunity to have a ceasefire, simply stop the killing, get the hostages released, which you say this is all about releasing the hostages. That's what the excuse has been, to bomb the Gaza. All of a sudden, it's like, no. That will be like against God's will almost that we do this.
Then what do you think? Let's separate rhetoric from the actions here. What is Israel's military, political, and maybe even religious and ideological goal here with this territory? Are they trying to just, is it a depopulation, genocide type of thing? Get rid of the people who are alive there? Are they trying to get rid of all the infrastructure so there's nothing left to live there? Do they want to occupy that territory, rebuild, in whatever way they see fit? Do they want to even gain territory beyond the territory of Gaza? We're looking at maps that maybe they're even going over the boundaries here into other territory. What's their ultimate goal, do you think?
Well, I think the ultimate goal of those currently waging the airstrikes who are saying no to the UN resolutions, the people around Benjamin Netanyahu, his defense minister, his those who have the current power, who don't represent the Israeli people. Again, like there's massive anti-government protests all over Israel by the people living there who, by and large, understand that their interests are being threatened by the current administration's fanatical ideology to take the path it's taking. But I think that those who are around Netanyahu believe in a greater Israel. They believe in not just the idea that it is God's will to have this land that they currently live in completely purged of the Arabs who had been living there for well over, 1,000 years, 2,000 years. The idea is to purge them. But then, yeah, as you pointed out, the greater Israel ideologues believe that the borders of Israel are ultimately meant to be much larger than they are today by a large measure. We're talking here. We have Syria would be part of greater Israel, a big chunk of Iraq, a big chunk of Turkey, all of Jordan, about half of Egypt would all be destined, according to the plans that were put forth by Jabotinsky, Rabbi Kook, the head of the lead rabbi under British Mandate Palestine, who created the radical yeshivas that produced these ideologues like Netanyahu. They want something that can't happen. You can't
Right.
get that.
You'd have to go to war with about 5 different countries there. But it seems like that might even be the plan. That's crazy, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and I had a look at the have you looked at the Richard Pearl 1996 clean break doctrine? It's a
No.
fascinating one. It was commissioned as soon as Yitzhak Rabin was killed. Richard Pearl and Wolfowitz, who are part of the new Project for New American Century, all these neocons, all converged in this think tank that they put into motion at this exact moment. Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated as he was preparing with Arafat to solidify the two-state solution, restore back the pre-1967 borders of Israel Israel and Palestine, but do that with economic development projects. That was cut down because Yitzhak was assassinated by a radical Zionist from Israel who thought that any capitulation to the Arabs was against God's will. So, he had to go on jihad, kill his own Israeli prime minister. As soon as that happened, Benjamin Netanyahu got his first hand on the wheel as prime minister of Israel, and Wolfowitz and Richard Pearl drafted a document called a Clean Break, a strategy for securing the realm. And you can go into this thing. There's been a lot of effort to scrub this from the internet, but it's still something one can find, where it calls for essentially what Israel needs to do with the backing of the new neoconservative administration that was preparing the groundwork of 9/11. They were already setting in the motion the new Pearl Harbor that they wanted to create to have an excuse to send full U.S. military might into the Middle East, right, as part of a new regime change program. And it calls for overthrowing Iraq, overthrowing Syria, overthrowing Lebanon, overthrowing Iran, with an Israeli Zionist neocon collusion, the securing of Israel in a purged zone that would be much, much safer, it says in the white paper, than it could have ever have happened. And a big part of that is the attack on Iran. They need to, because Iran is the world's 4th biggest military power. It was understood.
I think they're kind of off the radar for the average American citizen. They don't realize the population, the oil wealth, the historic significance, all the things that make Iran more powerful than we realize.
Oh yeah, it's really, people think of it as like another Iraq, and no, it's not that at all. It's a much more integrated, economically advanced country, and the sanctions that they've been under since the ousting of the Shah back in the 70s have, especially since the 90s and after 2000, forced them to become really sovereign in terms of their capacity, their control over their supply chains, their building up relations of Eurasian partners. even to the point that today they have, special security, energy, and economic cooperation agreements. But security is the big one for this discussion with China and with Russia. That was solidified just over the last 3 years in both cases. So you have these very important security pacts, which is different from what it was back when Richard Perle was writing this clean break doctrine for Netanyahu in the 90s, when you had a very, very weak China, a very, very weak Russia that had been destroyed under perestroika and the dissolution of the Soviet Union, right? When the CIA actually had offices in the Kremlin, they had offices in the major defense buildings of Russia in the 90s, controlling the Russian military arsenal. The nuclear arsenal was under the control of the CIA in the 90s. We privatized, we got our puppets like Boris Yeltsin to privatize the entire Russian economy. So we had Western directed puppets becoming a new generation of billionaires. That made Russia very weak, and they were all and they did the same thing to China, was very weak too. But now, and this is where Zbigniew Brzezinski said something that Biden laughed at in 1998. Biden actually has a video. There's a video footage, I could send it to you, of Biden's basically joking, saying, I was told that by one of my Russian counterparts after he got back from Moscow that if you're not more gentle with Russia, we might find new alliances with China and Russia. And he says, yeah, good luck to you on that. 1999.
That didn't age well.
No, that aged terribly. And Zbigniew was more clear-minded. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who had orchestrated so much of this, he's the one who brought in the original batch of neocons with Rumsfeld and Cheney and Richard Perle and Wolfowitz back in the 70s under Gerald Ford and Carter, right? He brought them in originally. He's the one who was writing in 1997 in the Grand Chessboard that the only thing that could threaten a new world order that was being proclaimed as the end of history in 1992 with the dissolution of the Soviet Union was a potential alliance of Iran, China, and Russia. And again, he was saying it, he didn't necessarily believe it could happen, but he was like, that's the only possible thing I could imagine that could threaten this game plan.
But look what they've done. They've forced them into each other's arms at this point. And that's what we see playing out. And we were talking before the show about how we've got the economic alliances of the BRICS, supposedly nothing to do with military agreements with that. But it is the Russia, China, India, Iran, almost the rest of the whole world, just besides the NATO cage, the USA proxies. So this is playing out economically, it's playing out militarily now. And so, this is a good time to take a quick break, talk about some of the people that are helping Badlands keep going here. We've got Goldco. We got to talk about them. So we've got skyrocketing inflation, endless war, $31 trillion in debt, $4.7 trillion in new proposed taxes, and this government just won't stop. Now they're hiring thousands of new gun-carrying IRS agents in all 50 states, and I wonder what for. The truth is, things get a whole lot worse if you're not protected, and that's why we've partnered with the top-rated precious metals company, Goldco, and they've helped people like you and me place over $1 billion in gold and silver. And for those with retirement accounts, they're offering supporters up to $10,000 in free silver when opening a qualified IRA account. And for cash buyers, you're going to love this. You can get bonus silver just for making a purchase. If you buy 15 grand worth of precious metals, you get $750 in bonus silver. And if you buy 25,000, you'll get $1,250 in free silver. So that is your opportunity to protect yourself from out of control corrupt government. Go to badlandsgold.com to learn how you can get started today. That's badlandsgold.com. And we are also going to play this ad from Holistic Movement. Just one moment.
Are you struggling with a diagnosis of one or more autoimmune diseases, such as diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, MS, celiac, psoriasis, psoriatic arthritis, fibromyalgia, or chronic fatigue? Are you or a family member struggling with chronic infections, such as strep, pneumonia, bronchitis, cold, and flu? Do you experience gastrointestinal issues? Through individual counseling via telemed, Holistic Movement can help pinpoint your condition and relieve its effects on your life through holistic and integrative practices including nutritional assessments, functional medicine workups, and referrals to traditional healing therapies like acupuncture and homeopathy. Request your complimentary virtual consultation and health assessment with Holistic Movement.
Visit badlandsmedia.tv/holistic or call 631-255-5003.
So, Matt, let's talk about the Congress people who voted for and voted against this Israeli military aid package. When we got the new Speaker of the House, pro-Trump guy, first thing he did as the Speaker was stand with Israel. And this is something all the Democrats got behind as well. So we only had Thomas Massie, Libertarian, Republican, voted against it because he doesn't want to vote for any type of military aid package for any country, right? It's a principle thing.
Yeah.
And then you have AOC and the Squad voting against it as well because they stand with Palestine. So this is an interesting thing where the radical Democrats are on the other side on this issue. So what does that tell you when all the Republicans and all the Democrats agree on this?
Usually when you get something like that happening there's the thing. If you have a good culture, a good, healthy, moral culture, that's a fine thing. You want to get, the collusion of people on all sides of the political aisle to agree on points of principle, though they disagree in differences. When you have a culture that becomes corrupt and stupid, and stupid becomes normal, and that goes on for too many decades, as our case is, it's usually a sign that something really bad is happening. When something becomes popular and convergent of all voices, usually, it means that there's something terrible. So I think in this case,
doesn't Congress believe in supporting Israel even more than the average American citizen? And what are the beliefs that the average, say, evangelical American has about Israel that causes them to support this war?
That's a loaded one, man. I mean, I think that there's a lot of walking contradictions inside of the American and Western psyche right now. We are a generally Christian society, but they're not all Christians, just like not all Jews, not all Muslims are the exact same thing, right? There's many denominations of all of these faiths. Many points of difference exist between how do we read, what philosophical setting do we have in our minds as we read various texts in the Quran, in the Torah, in the Bible, New Testament, have metaphorical language to them. Jesus spoke in metaphor. There's a poetry to a lot of this. Now, certain groups, certain philosophical matrices will say, this is how one should read this chapter or this, or one should be more literalist, or one should be whatever. In the case of the American people, there's not like one size fits all, but there's a general tendency to read the Bible in such a manner that presumes, and you could listen to John Hagee or Benny Hinn or a lot of the popular evangelists on Vision TV or other things that have been really, really promoted and get millions and millions and millions of views. And many of these people obviously tend to veer towards a more conservative stance, obviously. The particular interpretation tends to lend itself towards something new that emerged in the 19th century called rapture eschatology. And this is a big one that came out of the Anglican Church originally. So the Anglicans, which presume that the sitting monarch is the head of the church. Originally it was King Henry VIII who wanted a divorce, so he made his own church so that he could have sex with Anne Boleyn and divorce Catherine of Aragon. He was convinced by a Kabbalist black magician from Venice called Francesco Zorzi, from a high-level Venetian family, who became a bit of a counselor to Henry VIII in the 1520s, 1530s, who said, look, the only solution is create your own church. And it's like, that wasn't the only solution, first of all. There have been many kings before that who divorced their wives. They're the king. You could do whatever you want. You're the king. You make the rules. So, but no, his solution that Zorzi the Kabbalist proposed from Venice was make your own church, splinter it even further after the splintering had already begun and religious wars had already started. He's like, do it again. The same year, 1534, that Thomas More is getting his head chopped off because Thomas More is against it, right? The Prime Minister of England. And the same year that the Jesuits are also being created as an operation from Venice. And for those who don't know, Webster Tarpley did amazing work, research. That's the gold standard I see on the Venetian role in creating the Jesuits back at this period, where Ignatius Loyola was a traumatized mercenary who went through a spiritual crisis, was trying to go for a pilgrimage to raise money to go to the Holy Land, to go to Jerusalem, and he found himself in Venice in St. Mark's Square, and a Venetian oligarch woke up, as the story is told, from a vision with an angel who came to him in his bedroom saying, how could you be sleeping in this comfort of luxury when you have a holy man, the holiest of men, outside in the rain? And he went outside and found Ignatius Loyola smelly and dirty, and he brought him in and cleaned him up and took him to the Doge, the highest, sort of like the king of Venice, and took him to the Doge. And the Doge was so moved by Loyola's story that he paid for his pilgrimage to the Holy Land and gave him the money and the resources. And eventually he used that to found a new sect of Christian mercenaries with a rite of initiation, secret hierarchy inside that would protect Catholicism.
So we're seeing for hundreds of years how these oligarchs and these powerful players in the global stage have been mixing religion and government and the ideology together for their own means of accumulating more power.
Yeah, so I'd say that to get people to appreciate how many of the religious movements that we take for granted don't emerge organically, but many of them have emerged through the influence of intelligence, political intelligence operations that are highly tied to the occult, that utilize often things like Kabbalistic methods of self-brainwashing, which is what Zorzi was a master of. That's a big part of the renovation of Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism that Zorzi put into motion, as he created the basis of Rosicrucianism that grew into the Hellfire Club, the United Grand Lodge of British Masonry, which is sort of the master lodge that runs the Scottish Rite in America, which is sort of the rite that was created by Albert Pike, the creator of the KKK, the rite that J. Edgar Hoover was a devoted 33rd degree member of throughout his entire life. The FBI is generally a Freemasonic Scottish Rite group, but it's a sister lodge or a junior lodge to the broader United Grand Lodge in London. And this came out of the Zorzi Kabbalistic line. This is also, so I'm saying this to get across that you had both the Jesuit creation in that same year that the Anglican Church was created, with the right around the same Venetian operation to splinter and to create these controlled opposition groups. It's all about creating dual opposition groups, right? That will force a polarization and get people to fight over something that will undermine their actual interests. Kind of like, let's take a moment back here, jump to the present. Why did Israel create Hamas with the American intelligence back in 1987 with the first Intifada? When Hamas exists for the purpose of exterminating Israel, it makes you wonder, why did Israeli intelligence, as Chaz Freeman, the former U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia, he pointed out very eloquently, it was, and he's not alone, it was Israeli and American intelligence that created Hamas, which is so that's a paradox. Why would they do that? Well, similarly, why did British intelligence with the Israelis create and train the Palestinian Authority, which is in the West Bank? That's the dominant political structure of the West Bank. And this is there's the Electronic Intifada that released a number of internal documents proving that that's the case, that the Adam Smith Institute, which is a contractor for MI6, has been training Palestinian Authority officials to go in and clamp down on resistance fighters within Palestine who would be, so that this is a generally pro-American, pro-Israel faction. Why did this happen? Well, you created this to destroy, as Ron Paul made the point, to destroy the constructive thinking of Yasser Arafat, who was the head of the Palestinian Liberation Organization and who wanted, it was a more secular approach to trying to find constructive dialogue with the Israelis, which manifested in the discussions that were happening with the Oslo Accords, the economic development discussions with Yitzhak Rabin, Yossi Beilin, Shimon Peres back in the 90s. That's what Arafat was doing. And that's what they wanted to destroy. So create a more radicalized, religiously fanatic grouping of Hamas, create a more establishment pro-Israel grouping of the Palestinian Authority, get them, polarize it, and then get people, and then undermine the more reasonable groupings. In this case, it was Arafat. Back then, it was people like Thomas More, Erasmus, who were trying to take a more principled approach to dealing with the oligarchy back in the 16th century, which was always manipulating people in the shadows. And they had to kill Thomas More for that. And if you look at like, where does a lot of the rapture movement that really permeated the United States, where did it come from? It came from Anglican operatives like John Nelson Darby, who was a British, I think he was a Satanist, frankly. He created the Plymouth Brethren in the UK that gave rise to Aleister Crowley. He grew out of a Plymouth Brethren church group. It was built upon a sort of mystery sect system in the 1830s. Well, right after he did that, he went and toured the USA 6 times before, during, and after the Civil War, and set up these different branches across the US that interpreted Thessalonians, Paul's letters to Thessalonians, from a very particular standpoint that gave rise to the current interpretation of rapturism, the Schofield Bible, the Schofield Bible that was published in 1908 by these same Anglican groups in America, pushing for an Anglo-American divine special relationship. That's what the whole thing was. It was like at the heart of Pentecostalism, because that's where this grew out of, was the drive by people around Schofield, the Darbyites, to promote this concept that God wills that the Americans and the British unite in a divine mission. Right.
Right. Sounds like the Americans and the Israelis uniting in a divine mission, which is a similar narrative that's being put out there by these televangelists. And to me, it's a bit hokey, to have the Israeli flag and to have these charlatans, just beating the pulpits with these types of warmongering type of statements and trying to rationalize it biblically. And it's become very mainstream. And I compare it a lot to the anti-Russian type of brainwashing that we've had, because, to get the whole United States population against Russia, the USSR during the Cold War involved a lot of propaganda. Talking about every James Bond movie had a Russian villain, right?
Yeah.
So you have a whole generation, multiple generations of Americans who don't like Russia, don't trust Russia or anything that's Russian. And so, of course, now that we've got a modern Russia that's different from the past, it's still the boogeyman for the Democratic Party, that the scapegoat for everything. And now all the Americans are seeing Russia through that lens rather than through more of a realistic and time relevant lens. And now it's a similar thing with Israel that I'm seeing with a lot of people of the same generation, the baby boomer generation, which is a very big population group, very powerful because they have the money and they have the positions of power. And yet they've grown up with the same type of programming that Israel is the victim. It's a biblical destiny for America to aid Israel, that anyone who's Arab, on a different side is a terrorist. They use this word terrorist to lump anyone who's against Israel or whatever. And so the whole 9/11 psyop was basically also to get Americans to think that anyone who wears a turban, anyone who wears a cloth headdress, anyone who's Muslim is a terrorist, and so it's very difficult for, I think, for the older generation. It's interesting because a lot of the younger generation is actually anti-Israel. So you get like the AOC and the Squad is anti-Israel, and then the older generation is pro-Israel. But like we've said in the past, this type of tribalism and this type of very polarizing and pro-war type of stance is very unhealthy. So anything else you want to say about this idea of this being very religiously ideological. It's a holy war for the Holy Land, and how that could play out.
Yeah, I mean, some people might accuse me of being maybe a little repetitive or something, but I think it's important to be just reminded to be self-aware of the subtle spells, hypnotic spells that are transgenerational that shape the matrix in which we were born. We have to, because if you want to deal with the reality of living in an oligarchically influenced world, which all of humanity has always been influenced by a high priesthood of oligarchs representing old families. That's not taught in our popular textbooks, right? That's not generally acceptable opinions, but it's fact. It's still true. And the founding fathers understood this much better than our current generation of Canadians and Americans understand this. That's how they were able to navigate through the minefield of British intelligence, which was not less sophisticated back then than that it is today. It's just that
we actually have almost an oligarch worship in American culture, where the Rockefellers and the Kennedys and these powerful dynasties and families are revered. And now we've got these tech oligarchs who are like the kind of beacons of this is what, if you work hard and you drop out of college and you pursue your idea, then someday you could be like Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and if you have a high level family member in the military industrial complex committed to depopulation, you might get lucky and be a cardboard cutout selected to to sell some sort of a product that's going to brainwash people. Yeah, no, I know they've created this mystique. It's really a propaganda operation where we've been led to believe that these are all just these unique, brilliant people that came out of their garages, and we forget the fact that no, these are cardboard cutouts selected and used and ultimately disposable at the end of the day, to advance things that normally people would be unwilling to accept, like, IBM systems in their home as computer operating systems, which is why Microsoft had to be created in the first place, because IBM was still too associated with the Nazis back in the 70s, when people still had a bit more understanding of their history. They were like, no, I don't necessarily want to trust IBM to be in every home, surveilling me. So all that to say, it's good to be sort of to take a step back and see how we have an unhealthy relationship with this elite idea. Now, in the case of what we were talking about with the ironical tendency of many conservative Christians to support Israel, regardless of what type of injustice is done by
there doesn't seem to
Israel.
be any type of boundary. Like, doesn't matter what the state of Israel, what kind of inhumane thing they would do, any type of atrocity. There's literally nothing they could do that would cause an ideological American Christian to say, you know what, at this point, I'm not going to side with the state of Israel.
I'm not so comfortable with this, actually, at this moment. Yeah, well, part of this, and you got to listen to, I listen sometimes to John Hagee, who has these giant football stadiums full of people, listening to his sermons. And, you recently had Ted Cruz on the stage with him. And they were effectively calling for war with Iran, as he was doing back in the 90s, the great axis of evil that would, manifest finally the prophecies from 2,000 years ago of the Battle of Megiddo finally taking place, and Gog and Magog, and Russia is the Gog, and finally it's here. Now the Darbyites, keep in mind, we're also talking about this back when Russia was also targeted for destruction back in the 1850s with the Crimean War. That was how they were interpreting the end times before the U.S. Civil War. Megiddo, the Battle of Megiddo was interpreted.
See, isn't that convenient, the way war propagandists interpret the Bible for their plans?
Yes, every time things go bad in society and people go through economic scarcity, depression, there's a financial depression, and a resurgence of wars. There is always and always has been a massive spike of eschatological, aka end times cults, that always grow. Always, it's always the case that interpret like now is the time. Now is the end time in whatever Torah, Quran, Bible language or books that I'm using that talk about end times. Now is the moment, because it's a bit of an arrogant thing in my mind, but that's what John Hagee really exemplifies. And so there's a bit of an ironic anti-Semitism that John Hagee would not admit to having had, because what are these people who promoted Dick Cheney and the rise of the neocons and the unquestioning support of the war on terror? You're with us or with terrorists. Yeah, of course, we're against terrorists. Let's support, bombing the hell out of the countries that had nothing to do with 9/11. That whole grouping, they actually kind of want to see Armageddon. They kind of want that nuclear war to
they want a front
happen.
row seat for their big,
Yeah, so
movie they have in their mind.
exactly. It's a movie, and so part of it is they want things that will result in the mass extermination of Jews. They've got a view that the Jews now, because we're going to usher in the apocalypse of John and the book of Daniel, will manifest it all. Now Christ will come back if we do that, and at which point all of the dead Jews will now become Christian and in paradise. That's insane. I'm sorry. In my view, that is nuts.
It's sad. Yeah.
It's sad because you're basically saying that we're going to exterminate all the people. And keep in mind too, the reason why the Jews were they were convinced to all go to this very volatile region in the desert in the first place was because you had a bunch of pro-fascist anti-Semites like Lord Balfour, like Lloyd George, like Lord Milner, who despised the Jews. Like Darby actually was an anti-Semite. But they all wanted to. Lord Shaftesbury, the British Anglican who was the first sort of Zionist who founded modern Zionism in the 1830s with Darby, who proselytized, sent out missionaries into Eastern Europe and into Russia to try to convince the Jews that they want to leave Europe and go to the desert. That guy, they're all anti-Semites. They wanted a world purged of Jews, but yet they devoted so much of their time and energy to creating a movement for a homeland for the Jews.
They did purge the Jews from Europe.
They did. They did a great job. They did more than Hitler could have dreamed. That's actually that's a whole side conversation. But and so these same groupings are also promoting through the same occult groups like that are working through the Okhrana, like I mentioned, Sergei Zubitov, who is the head of the Okhrana, radical anti-Semite in Russia. That's the Russian secret police. He's also promoting the protocols of Zion, right? The forged documents that are just retooled documents that took language from a satire essay from 30 years earlier, called A Discourse Between Machiavelli and Montesquieu. And then you could see this original document from the 1860s that they just took the same language, retooled it to make it a Jewish cabal instead of another kind of cabal. And then they put this out there into the Russian courts to convince the Tsar Nicholas II to purge all of his advisors who were working with the American System School of Abraham Lincoln, Charles Sumner, William Seward, William Gilpin, all of these American grand strategists who had understood the nature of the British global intrigue system were working with patriots in Russia and who had to be blamed or labeled as Jewish puppets trying to destroy Russia. And look, we got the protocols to prove it. So Zubitov, who's an anti-Semite, promoting the protocols of Zion, destroying the pro-development, pro-industrial movement in Russia, right? That works. The stupid Tsar Nicholas II actually does fire these people like Sergei Witte, who's a pro-American finance minister. He's fired. Now all of a sudden he has no good advisors. He starts misstepping left and right, doubling down on things that lead into the Bolshevik Revolution, which is another trap set for Russia to destroy them by clamping down on Jews, creating Jewish pogroms, forcing Jews into little ghettos in Russia that they're not allowed to leave, having rioters go into Jewish neighborhoods, killing Jews in the 1890s because the protocols are now the proof. And then Zubitov is also working with Jabotinsky. Jabotinsky is the leading political Zionist, very violent figure working with Rabbi Kook to bring all of the Jews into Zion, into Jerusalem, and carry out jihad against those who are already living there. And there's massive atrocities by Jabotinsky's mercenaries, supported by the British. And then inversely, the British are also supporting radical factions of Islamic sects around the Salafists who are being supported. And this becomes the Muslim Brotherhood, who then carry out these eye for an eye conflicts, resulting in these forever hostilities. But That's what the current Christians who are supporting this whole holy war, end times, rapture theology, they're ultimately promoting the mass murder and extermination of the Jews that they say they love so much, and themselves, frankly, because when you release that type of conflict, we don't know what's going to happen. If Israel has something like at least 300 nuclear weapons, possibly a lot more, right? Is the U.S. Lindsey Graham is saying that we need to strike Iran now. If Iran comes in, if you start striking Iran, and Israel's already attacking Syria, they're already attacking Lebanon. You know, you've got strikes from Hezbollah into northern Gaza as well, into Israel. Not Gaza, sorry, into Israel. You got a ground invasion, but Israel's attacking all of these other Arab states around them. You got, these neocons frothing at the mouth saying, now's our time to strike Iran. Iran is sitting there. They've been very, very withholding and keeping themselves, despite the amounts of hundreds of their leaders and scientists getting assassinated by Anglo-American and British intelligence over the past 20 years. They have withheld quite a bit. It's incredible how much withholding they've done.
It is kind of interesting because I remember decade, 2 decades ago, the comments of wiping Israel off the map were just repeated on, CNN a million times to try to get it into Americans' minds is that Iran wants to destroy Israel, and that's the only way that they view Israel is by, wiping it off the map. And yet we haven't heard a peep, out of Iran. At least I haven't looked into it, and it hasn't been published in the USA mainstream media, as far as I know. So that is interesting. Maybe they're holding their cards close right now to see how things play out. And it seems like Russia and China and some of the major countries who are calling for the ceasefire are trying to be diplomatic, right? I mean, this is like the Ukraine conflict, where it seems like there is a contingent of the majority of the countries of the world want peace, want diplomacy, and yet it is that NATO cage, as you called it, the USA and its proxies. And you've talked about in the past, you've talked about the Anglo roots of power, and how the British intelligence and the British power structures use the USA as a dumb giant, the military power to achieve its means. And some people would even interpret that, and maybe this is very closely connected, that Israel uses the United States as its dumb giant. That you have the Israel lobby, right? That donates a lot to American politicians. Then they maybe feel like they own those politicians. And then those politicians vote to send huge aid packages. We're talking billions of dollars. I mean, does America give as much money to any other country in the world? So then who works for who? Who's really more powerful, the puppet master or the puppet? So
that's a great question.
Is there a connection here between the Anglo controllers and the Israeli controllers?
It's a way of getting two idiots to serve a higher power that ultimately wants to destroy both idiots. So what they did, if you look at, we already went through in previous shows the British creation of Israel, right? We already went through that. People can watch our previous episodes if they want to. So the British created Israel out of British Mandate Palestine. They're the ones who created the whole movement to begin with the help of their Pilgrim Society, Anglo-American collaborators in the Fifth Column operations within the United States that took over control of foreign policy over the dead body of William McKinley, murdered in 1901. And continued to grow. They created the Council on Foreign Relations, right, as the American branch of the British Roundtable movement, created by or steered by Lord Milner, who was also the co-writer of the Balfour Accords. So you have this whole takeover that is increasingly happening over the dead bodies of many presidents: Warren Harding, Franklin Roosevelt. Many of Roosevelt's allies are purged. Many are killed, who are very high-level people. The former the man who was going to become district attorney and fire Hoover, friend of Roosevelt, is killed in 1932. Many. JFK, right? So what's happening? You have, once Israel is created, a day later, the British give up their mandate on Palestine. Now it's Israel. Part of it involves the creation of Israel, and the UN security, the UN resolution that creates Israel also demands the creation of Palestine. only half of that rule is followed. Israel, not Palestine. Palestine's never allowed a seat at the table. They're never recognized as a nation as Israel is. So that's illegal, but they do it anyway. So then you have the Mossad is created after Shin Bet, which is Israeli intelligence. That's a convergence of a variety. The Haganah party and other the Haganah movement, other things are converged into an Israeli intelligence operation with Shin Bet, the IDL. But then you have in 1950 Mossad. Mossad is created by the CIA, but the CIA was created after the purge of the OSS. Right, so the OSS is purged in 1946 September. That's what has 1945 September by Truman. This is where you have bad people in the OSS, but you have a lot of good people in the OSS. A lot of people who really understand British imperial Wall Street grand strategy for fascism. They get it. They're purged. Only the evil ones like Allen Dulles are kept. It takes 2 years to reorganize. The British help under the new Anglo-American special relationship that Churchill announces the same day they create the Five Eyes, or what becomes the Five Eyes, the UK-USA Signals Agreement in 1946, May 6th. Same day as the Iron Curtain speech, same day as the Anglo-American special relationship. And MI6 now is all over Washington. The Rhodes Scholars, the Fabians, who are there in the wings in the State Department, now take control under Truman. They're working now to create a new intelligence apparatus, which Truman, the young proto-George Bush Jr. idiot, oversees. He supports. Now it's created. It's called the CIA. But the CIA is not American, by and large. It's a foreign agency in America with good people sometimes in it, but overall it's foreign directed. This is then what is used, this Anglo-American thing, to create Mossad. The ADL grew out of the B'nai B'rith. The B'nai B'rith goes back to the 1850s as the sort of Jewish branch of the Mazzini, Palmerston, Young Europe, Young Turk, Young Albania, Young German, Young French, Young America movements. Albert Pike was the head of the southern branch of the Young America Freemasonic group. This is the weaponization of people for the sake of overthrowing governments you don't like to create geopolitical effects that are beneficial to the British Empire, which is itself operating through these Masonic front groups. That's what the B'nai B'rith comes out of. It's a Freemasonic front group with a lot of Freemason. They will deny it, but it's demonstrable that this is what it was. This is what gives birth to the ADL. A new breed of nominally Jewish names are assigned roles of being mercenaries within this established order. The Bronfmans are created to start setting up organized crime. Mayor Lansky comes out of the Bronfman operation, right? As far as like Jewish crime syndicates that are tied to operations that will involve money laundering, offshore accounts, other things that organize international crime. The British Cayman Islands, a lot of British territories are very useful to cultivate this system that involves the flow of narcotics, trafficking, other things that will be useful in the age of the Cold War. So during the Cold War, they need, and the CIA openly is working with Lucky Luciano, with the mafia. That's a big part of how they're able to control much of South America, Cuba, other things, right? That's Mayor Lansky's playground is Cuba before Castro. They're working closely with the United Fruit Company, which is a CIA front group that oversees the overthrowing of various governments that are a little bit too for the people across Latin America, and installs right-wing, and when I say right-wing, I'm talking Nazi. I'm not talking typical conservative. I'm talking of Nazi regimes in South America running death squads, advised usually by unreconstructed Nazis, which were also hired by the CIA, right, and given new jobs, new assignments.
So this is a good time to point out here, there is no ethnic basis really of this deep state that you're describing. You just described British allied with German Nazis, allied with Israelis, so it's not like one unified ethnic or religious group. The only thing that maybe unifies them is that thirst for power. And then the long game, I think you were hinting at this before, is that the Anglos would happily bring down Israel and the United States in the end game, right? That they destroy each other, they get destroyed in a world war, and then what's left is this kind of the playbook of the globalist to be able to make an international order.
Yeah, they want an oligarchical collectivism with a highly reduced, traumatized population, which will be willing to accept after a sustained amount of trauma. And we're talking trauma like you can't even imagine, like dark age trauma, nuclear war trauma, like trauma. seeing your friends and family starving, dying on the streets, that type of trauma for a sustained period. Kind of like what was done in the Great Depression. It's hard to imagine the type of pain suffered. Then people become more susceptible to superstition, more desperate, more inclined to become fanatical, and more accepting of a new narrative, which is also part of the Great Reset, Great Narrative Project that Klaus Schwab unveiled a year and a half ago. That we need now new post-Christian narratives that are going to replace the outdated, obsolete, old sacred stories that animated us for 2,000 years that are no longer applicable to the transhumanist
That
age.
you will own nothing and be happy, Gaia worship.
Yeah, like
thing.
how do you normalize that? How do you normalize eating bugs? Like you got to have like some serious religious sort of justification to give you a sense like that you're going to be a better person, or somehow like that this is what you'll want to do and promote. Yeah, so this is again, this brings in, if people want to know why do the governments of the world all of a sudden, or especially the United States, want us to think about aliens all of a sudden? Why is this all over our media and congressional hearings and NASA inquiries and Air Force inquiries and Pentagon inquiries into like aliens, UFO contact with humans? There's very powerful forces that want us to think about these things right now. That's why they're preparing the groundwork for something that will be brought in as a new UFO religious
Right.
order. With
Well, you talked about trauma,
Yeah.
so maybe that's it. That there's going to be a UFO related trauma, and
Yeah.
maybe a UFO related savior figure. Or you mentioned it being religious. So the first thing people should do is watch your documentaries about this, so that they can deprogram
Right.
themselves and see through these psyops. Let's take a really
Right.
quick break
Yeah. Okay.
to talk about our sponsors here. Let's play this and we'll be right back.
My Towels solved the problem that we've all had with towels. You go into the stores and they feel lotiony and soft, but then you get them home and they wind dry you. That's why I made My Towels. They actually work, they're soft, and they absorb. And now I'm excited to announce 2 brand new lines of My Towels. What makes them the best towels ever is they're now made with 100% long staple Shapir cotton. This is a combed ring spun cotton that makes My Towels even softer and more absorbent than ever. And now you get a 6-piece set for an amazing introductory sale price as low as $29.98. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to get My Towels for only $29.98. Or you can get my designer premium line for just $20 more. Either way, you save 50% now on all My Towels. They actually work. What a concept. This offer won't last long, so please order now.
MyPillow.com.
And now, are you ready to embark on a journey to America's heartland through its natural mouthwatering sweetness? From a small town in Nebraska, Benson Honey Farms brings you just that and more. Indulge in the authentic, unpasteurized, 100% natural honey, a product of diligent bees working the fields of wildflowers. It's a raw, robust, and let's not forget the added excitement Benson brings to your barbecue, a unique smoky sauce, tangy yet indulgent in the authentic, unpasteurized, natural honey. It's the flavor of the Heartland Cookout. And, if you're craving something sweet, their honey-infused candies capture the essence of Nebraska. Each bite, a delightful taste of home. So check out Benson Honey Farms' celebration of the America First spirit, a symbol of the resilience of our homeland and embodying the spirit of Badlands. Their family-run operation is a reminder that the true flavor of America lies in its heartland. So check that out, badlandsmedia.tv/honey. Okay, Matt, we've got 5 minutes left here. So let's bring this to a conclusion about what people can do, because I think if people are on Twitter and people are civically engaged or engaged in talking about politics, I think they feel forced into a camp. They have to be in the pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas camp, or the pro-Israel camp here. And so is there another way to engage with our fellow, let's say our fellow American citizens or Canadian citizens here, to talk about this without the religiosity, without the fervor, without the being an ideologue about it, and just talk about the facts and figures? What are some resources? What are some mindsets or perspectives you might suggest?
Well, I think that what people need to do is help develop means of communicating in ways that help people who are confused see paradoxes. Like what I mentioned here, Hamas wants Israel destroyed, right? That's part of their charter. They want no Israel. They want Israel to be wiped off the map. Well, then why did Israel create them, right? That's a paradox. Just let it sit, right? So speaking that way, because people tend to get into didactic, literalistic language sometimes, which is just going to be polarizing. You're not helping the mind of the person you're talking to see where there's a break with what they think and reality. So you want to help people see where's there differentiation between what you believe in and reality, right? That's the paradox. So the other thing I would say is look to points where there were reasonable prospects for peace, because that's what has to be restored into the conversation. Most Israelis living in Israel want that. They want peace with the Arabs. That's what Trump's Abraham Accords were all about. That's what was really being targeted for destruction, is the type of constructive dynamic that was being birthed with the Abraham Accords, of recognizing, which was moving very fast, and China and Russia were supporting this orientation of recognizing Israel by the Arab neighbors for the first time. It was moving fast. Economic development was what Trump had put into motion too, around building infrastructure together to start healing hostility. That has to be restored. That's what Yitzhak Rabin and Arafat were doing in the 90s. That's what has to be done today. That's what China and Russia have been doing by creating stabilized regions all over the Middle East. That type of thing has to be recognized.
It's builders versus the destroyers. It's
Exactly.
a very simple concept, isn't it?
It
If
really
the people
is.
who want to build together, want economic prosperity, and you really put aside the ideology when you start building something, don't you? You're using basic mathematics to build a infrastructure project, and you're putting aside the esoteric stuff for a moment. That's really interesting.
You become future oriented. You're not stuck by the past. No longer is dominating you, all the past transgressions. It's the future that you're creating that becomes what defines you and your relations with your neighbors now all of a sudden. So it's the same thing for a marriage that's in trouble, or a family or a friendship that's in trouble. You got to become future oriented, let go of the past, forgive, and do it by working together on things that don't exist yet, but that are needed. So that always works. And that's what oligarchies always try to destroy. There's a lot of resources. Maybe I'll send you a few and we could put them in the description box under this video for people to click on. And the UFO video that my wife and I have been producing will be released tonight. So go to CanadianPatriot.org for episode 1. It's going to be 8 episodes. First episode, we'll go back into Babylonian days and set the stage with some deep history. So that'll be tonight, CanadianPatriot.org.
That is so important as we're anticipating some type of psyop. I mean, it's already unfolding before us, so people can deprogram themselves and their friends and family. Go to CanadianPatriotReview.org and watch that first episode tonight. Go to SeanMorganReport.com, get my breaking news updates, and we'll see you next Breaking History next week.